So next keynote we've got is Matt Jarratt, who is the Assistant Director of Operations at Procure Plus. Over to you, Matt. You should be free to share your screen.
Thanks, Joe. Just give us a second and I'll see. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Right, sorry, I'm just waiting for it to kick in as the actual presentation. Is it?
Yeah, we can see the slides. Yeah.
All right, is that on there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, good morning, everyone. Straight to the start. So I wanted to just introduce Procure Plus a little bit to give you a bit of context around what I'm going to be talking about, which will be more on the procurement side of modern methods of construction. So just a little bit about us to add to what we've already been talking about. We're a not-for-commercial profit organisation based in the northwest of England, or in about 70 different homes all over the place at this moment in time, as most of us are, I think. And what we're here to do is we create effective routes to market in the route of frameworks and dynamic purchasing systems. Now, what I'm not talking about there around a route to market is knowing how to fill in the forms, the procurement forms, and providing you with a list that hopefully there'll be someone that you like on there. It's about getting the best out of the market. So to get the best out of the market, we really need to understand the market. So to understand the market, we spend a lot of our time building relationships with the key stakeholders in that market, understanding what works for all the stakeholders to provide good projects and what is attractive to them. How do we reduce the risk? And we do that to identify the best models and ways to interact with the market to get the best out of it. And that happens all the way through. There's a little graphic at the side just around, we interact with the contractors, the landlords, external bodies. More and more we're talking to funding bodies as part of the project, and the supply chain. Understand what works for everybody, and we turn that into a product and a way to go to the market. And that happens all the way through the procurement life cycle. It isn't just about starting off, carrying out a procurement at the start and then leaving people to it. To understand what's effective and what's working, we need to go all the way through that life cycle. So from the establishment of a framework or dynamic purchasing system, managing those call-offs, understanding what's working well, what isn't working well, and then monitoring how it's happening for the life of a project. We have some systems in the background that allow us to monitor the commercial activity and ensure that the price that was agreed at the start of a procurement is being delivered during a procurement. And we also have mechanisms to monitor the quality of performance and work with people. And by doing that, we can then learn and evolve every time we go out to market to what is working for the market, and keep that evolution going with the next competitions and next ways we go out the market. And the way we can do that is we do it a lot. A lot of people will go to market once or twice a year. We do it 300 plus times a year to get the best out of it and understand what that looks like. And that activity generates us the opportunity for the plus side of our business. I talk very much around the procure, but the plus side is about getting people who are distant from the labour market into employment. And this year, despite the pandemic, we've managed to get 640 people who were distant from the labour market into full-time roles. So that's just a little bit about PP. Obviously, we want to now talk about modern methods of construction. So I wanted to really just go through our interactions with the market over the last few years, what we've learned and how we've built that into our procurement exercises to make options available for people. So just a bit of background, we had a development framework that ran between January 2016 and January 2020, and it was successful, but it contained 3 traditional building lots based on size and geography, and an offsite manufacturing construction lot. And going back to the first slide, what we want to do is we want to add value to the process. We don't want to just provide a list. And we felt with the traditional types of construction, we were just providing a list. We weren't adding as much value as we liked. However, with the offsite manufacturer lot, we felt that there were more elements that we could add to it. So we therefore decided coming up to January 2020, that the next framework would be purely modern methods of construction, and we'd move away from the traditional one. And there's just a few images there of some of the sites that we did work on the old framework using the offsite manufacturer. So But for putting a new framework or dynamic purchasing system in place, I wanted to talk a little bit about the market engagement that we did. And that isn't about justifying why we would want to use modern methods of construction. There's lots about there, and we all know that. It was the barriers that what is stopping it happening at this moment in time, because a lot of people are talking about it and want to do it, but it isn't happening to the scale that we wanted. So we wanted to address, during the procurement activity, we address some of the reasons and some of the barriers that are stopping it. So some of the considerations we looked at was the types of contractors that we'd want to engage with. Do we want to engage directly with manufacturers, with general contractors? What would that makeup look like to get the best out of the market? We wanted to look at the types of systems that were available. Did we want to define a particular system, a modular system, a panelized system, or something else, as Joseph's just been talking about? Or did we want to leave it quite open? And again, that was looking at what was available in the market, but also what were people looking for. We have people who do want to do massive sites, but we also have lots of infill sites and garage sites where people want to do 6 or 7 properties. And would a modular solution be suitable where there's limited access routes and the like? So we looked at all that the types of systems available to understand what we wanted. And we looked at the call-off mechanism. We found that a lot of the barriers to people starting working on using these technologies at this point in time were around that call-off mechanism, the program and price. There was a lot of frustration from the supply chain and the manufacturers that they did a lot of work up front to understand the suitability of a site, and a lot of those sites didn't carry on. And they felt some of the problems with that was because they'd gone through a single stage competition. However, landlords were still very keen on a single stage. So we looked at some options around that. Would we do it as a single stage competition? We'll be looking at 2-stage processes. And we also looked at the appropriate procurement mechanism. A lot of people are using dynamic purchasing systems quite comprehensively at the moment, and we prefer the framework options with a lot of these call-offs. And the reason being, the dynamic purchasing system is very good in an emerging market because you can add people all the way along the life cycle of that dynamic purchasing system, whereas a framework is closed off at the original procurement. But likewise, you have to do a competition, and you would always have to do a single stage or a 2-stage under competition. There wasn't the opportunity for direct awards and other mechanisms. And we also looked at forms of contract. We see that the forms of contracts are barriers to a lot of the service providers, because we started off with contracts that were that were designed to be suitable for all parties. And then we've amended them over the years to the point where they are very much leaning towards one party. And was that something that was going to slow down the opportunity in this framework? So quickly moving on. That was all the investigation and works we did with all the different stakeholders to understand what we wanted to put in place. And we went for, in the end, a framework agreement that went live in November 2020. Now, we looked at the opportunities around the types of contractors, and we came up with the solution that we wanted a contractor who could design, manufacture and build, provide a full turnkey solution. There was a lot of concern from landlords that they wanted to have a direct relationship with the people who were building those products. And did they need the overheads and profit of a main contractor if the manufacturers could carry out those roles as well? So we, as part of this framework, went for that option. We also left it open around the types of systems. So house types in compliance with category 1 or 2 on the MMC definition framework enabled us to get both modular and panelized systems. It was more around what we were trying to achieve with it, not how it was being achieved. And the mechanisms for call-offs, we did a lot of work on this because we did see that this was going to be one of the limiting factors and one of the issues to getting projects up and running. And from that, we still left the options in for single stage. We've still got a lot of landlords who want to appoint an architect, they want to design the project, get planning permission, and then put it out to market. But we also listened to the bidders around having another option with that, where it's more of a 2-stage process. And the way we did that from a framework perspective was to price performance specifications, so we could have bidders' standard house types to get a good base price, rather than providing them with a house type that they may never actually be producing. And this enabled us to get a fixed base price and to start looking at more direct selections in a 2-stage process, rather than just single-stage competitions. And we reduced the level of amendments within the schedule of amendments, and also brought in a pre-construction service agreement as part of the suite of documents we had there. And that was very much around that two-stage process. We had a lot of feedback from the bidders around they would carry out a lot of speculative work over a number of years sometimes, then to see that schemes weren't feasible and they wouldn't move forward. And we looked at the options to sit that under a pre-construction services agreement to potentially mean that they would be able to get money back for those works in certain circumstances when agreed with all parties. Again, it was just very much interacting with the market, understanding what works for them and what doesn't. And as you can see on the right-hand side, that was the list of service providers that were successful at getting onto our framework. So we have got a combination of both modular and panelised systems on there. So I thought I'd just talk through a little. As you can see, it only went live in the middle of a pandemic, which isn't the best time to go out to market, but nevertheless, we have had quite a lot of inquiries. So I wanted to do a little bit of a case study. Now, what you're perhaps expecting is some nice pictures of a site that's been moving on brilliantly through this case study, and I wanted to look at it in a slightly different way to one that wasn't as successful. So just to go through the detail of that, we had an inquiry in January 2021 from a local authority. The question went the same route as most of the inquiries we get. We've gone to all the framework providers out there. Why should we use yours? We're going to compare you against everyone. And my answer to that was, well, I wouldn't ever say to use our framework. I'd say, let's have a look to see, is our framework right for you? Are the service providers on there suitable? So from that, we said, we'll happily carry out an expression of interest based on your project to find out whether we would be able to deliver that for you. And the detail of the project they were looking for was they had 15 dwellings designed to a REBA stage 3 with planning approval. They wanted a passive house certification, they wanted a one-stage procurement, and they wanted to be on site in the summer of 2021 to be complete in early 2022. So we went out to market to look at how feasible this was and to feedback. And the feedback that we got was very positive to start off with. All bidders were interested in being part of the process, but they had a lot of questions that they wanted to address. And the questions very much were around, there's planning approval for a design to REBA stage 3. They want to see the designs, because could they replicate those designs, or would they have to amend them in some way? If they did have to amend them in some way, would that require the planning approval to be updated and changed? So that started eating into the time frame that we were looking at. The question was asked around passive house certification. Was it to a passive house standard, as it was certification required? The client confirmed that certification was required. And again, this sets into the time frame to say, well, if that is the case, generally certification will have to go to a certifier. The proposals will go to a certifier. It'll come back several times, and that can take 8 to 10 weeks. So if we've already started to say, well, actually, will we have to go back to planning permission and the time associated with that? Will we have to go then to the passive house certifier? And at the end of that passive house certification process, will we then have to put another planning application in place? All of this led to the point where we got 4 of the 6 bidders dropped out of the process and said, we don't think that the time frame is feasible. And of the 2 bidders that were left, we then started to speak to them around what's the indicative costings, because we felt that this could go on for a long time. And if the costings that we're going to spit out at the end of it weren't going to be suitable, would that be something that would carry on? And what was interesting was there was a modular provider and a panelised provider that looked at it, and they talked about how their prices vary. They looked at the standard house types that we tendered at the start of the process, and the price per metre square of between £920 and £1,150. And then they looked at the adjustments to those costs to change those designs. And as you can see, there was a big difference in the costs of the uplift to achieve the passive house from that standard house type. And all this fed back to the landlord, and we finished off with, actually, this probably wasn't a project that we'd want to put through the framework because the service providers on there just weren't suitable. So I've talked very quickly just around some of the experiences and information that we've gleaned from the market and the framework that we've put in place. I want to just talk a little bit about what does that mean for us now? What are we going to do next? And the first point with this will be, it will be understanding that market and engaging with that market better. So we will be going to the factories and having a look at how those products are put in place and how that works. The 2-stage process I described earlier, we want to put a brochure in place of the various contractors that we got with their standard house types and the indicative costs of those standard house types. And then we want to start to understand how that build of cost will change as you put bespoke designs in, or whether you would use the standard house types. What will happen if you're going to zero carbon? What will happen if you're going to passive house? And really understanding the costs associated with that. That will lead us to move from that base pricing that we will sit in the brochure to understand what is the cost to productionize. We were talking to one of the panelized providers that indicated it will cost them to change from their standard house type to a bespoke design around £20,000. But then that depends on how many properties are we looking at that. Is it going to be £20,000 across 20 properties, 100 properties, 5 properties? And we want to understand from a modular's perspective, what's the cost to productionize and change those lines to make that work in the same sort of way. We also want to have a look at material interactions. We, as part of the other side of our business on the investment program, interact with the supply chain greatly. And we have lots of deals in place with the supply chain that, again, we could add into this framework to provide further value for money. And then identify these more suitable projects and carry on with these exercises, carry on with the market engagement and understand what's happening and how we can make more things deliver. And that was my whistle-stop tour of where we're up to on the procurement front.